All right, well, hello, everyone. My name is Linda Lukasik, and I'm the Executive Director at Environment Hamilton, and I want to welcome you to this session, Air Quality Monitoring in Hamilton, Giving Community a Voice. Environment Hamilton is facilitating the community engagement element of this initiative. And for those who don't know us, we're a local not-for-profit, and we're engaged in helping Hamiltonians with developing knowledge and skills to work with us to enhance and protect the local environment. And we've been around now for 20 years. So I am going to introduce the others on the project team momentarily, but I just want to walk through some basic information about using Zoom meetings. And I'm sure a lot of you have been on Zoom meetings before, but just in case, we just want to make sure that you're all comfortable with the system. So we ask that you remain muted during the presentation portion. And note too, for anyone who needs it, we do have live captioning enabled. So I'm just going to jump to the next slide just so that you can see there's a button there that you can click and you can pull up the live transcription for the meeting as we're working through it. So closed captioning. Okay, so there's the slide. Okay, so we've dedicated, as I say, a significant portion of the meeting to community input. And during the community input portion of the meeting, you'll be able to provide your input to us in several ways. You can use the chat feature on the Zoom menu, and you can type in your questions and comments, and we'll make sure that we save all of that input and speak to any questions that you raise. And there's also the raise hand feature that you can use, and you'll be asked to unmute, and you can ask your question verbally during the meeting. And we'll do our best for that portion of the meeting to facilitate a fulsome question and answer session. You can also provide more detailed input following the meeting if you prefer, and we'll share. You should have also already received it in an email about the session tonight, links to the methods that you can use to provide more detailed input, but we'll speak to it in more detail in the meeting. And finally, tonight, as I've already said, we are recording this session. So I'm going to start. Here's the agenda for tonight. We're going to start with a welcome. I'm just doing the welcome now, land acknowledgement and some introductions. You'll hear an overview of the project purpose. You'll hear about how community can become engaged in project development and implementation. We'll also have some group discussion about air quality issues and concerns. And then we'll wrap up with next steps and closing comments. I just want to begin tonight with a land acknowledgement. And I want to acknowledge that the land that I'm situated on here in Hamilton is traditional territory for the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people. And the larger territory of Southern Ontario is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenants. And this is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas. And it's all about coexisting peacefully and sharing the territory and protecting the land. There's only one spoon, and that reflects the need to share and to ensure that the bowl is never empty. And this refers to taking care of the land and the creatures that we share it with. And there are no knives. This is all about protecting and sharing and peace. And subsequent Indigenous nations and other peoples were invited into this covenant in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to gather on this territory, even virtually, and to work in this community. And through this land acknowledgement, my intent is to honor and show gratitude to the original stewards of the land. And together, may we care for this land and each other, being mindful of generations to come. So I'm really pleased right now to be able to introduce the other members of the project team. This meeting really represents the official launch of this new project that's being funded by Health Canada. The City of Hamilton is the lead partner in the project, working in collaboration with Environment Hamilton and the University of Toronto's Department of Geography, Geomatics, and Environment. And from the City of Hamilton, we have with us tonight Trevor Imhoff, who I'm sure many of you know already. And Trevor is currently the Senior Project Manager, and he leads the Air Quality and Climate Change team. He chairs the Corporate Climate Change Task Force in response to Hamilton Council's Climate Emergency Declaration. And Trevor has been a professional in the environmental field specializing in program development, initiation, implementation, and monitoring for multi-stakeholder projects, plans, and policies. He sits on and leads varying multidisciplinary committees, including representation from federal, provincial, and municipal government agencies, businesses, academia, nonprofits, and grassroots organizations. He has experience solving complex environmental issues in the fields of air quality, climate change, mitigation and adaptation, natural heritage, hydrogeology, planning, and civil engineering. And we also have Andrea Mcdowell with us from the City of Hamilton. Andrea has worked in the environmental sector for 25 years for all 3 levels of government and the private sector, and she's currently the project manager for air quality and climate change with the City of Hamilton. And I also want to acknowledge that we have Jean-V Desai here with us tonight. And Jean-V is an intern working with Clean Air Hamilton. And Jean-V is going to be our trusty chat monitor and fielder of hand raising when we get to the discussion. So thank you, Jean-V, for your support. We also are lucky to have as part of the project team, Dr. Matthew Adams. And Dr. Adams is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography, Geomatics, and Environment at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. He obtained his PhD from McMaster University in the School of Geography and Earth Sciences, and he also holds an honors Bachelor's of Environmental Science degree and Master's of Environmental Science degree from Lakehead University. Dr. Adams' research background is in environmental analysis. His research examines human exposure to environmental pollutants. He relies on real-time and passive observations, analytical work, spatial statistics, and computational modeling. And finally, I've already told you that I'm the executive director at Environment Hamilton. And just very briefly, my background does include some expertise on air quality analysis through past work as a research assistant at McMaster University. And I hold an undergraduate degree in biochemistry from the university. And I've also got a Master's of Environmental Studies and a PhD in planning from the University of Waterloo. And just very briefly, I've done extensive work on air quality issues at Environment Hamilton over the years, including engaging community and stack watching. Probably some of you on this call have done some stack watching and bicycle air monitoring, among other projects. We've been dabbling in using low-cost air particulate sensors. And I'm also engaged in air policy efforts at the provincial level. So we've got what I think is a really great team that's come together to work on this important project. And I'm pleased now to hand things over to Andrea, who's going to talk to you more about the project purpose. Andrea.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm really excited about our conversation tonight. I will warn you that my internet connection hates video. So if at any time you're having a hard time hearing me, please flag it in the chat or raise your hand and I will turn my video back off again. Linda, can you progress the slide? All right. So I know that air quality issues in Hamilton are not new for many of the folks on the call, but I'll just go into some of the background before we get into this particular project. As part of the regulations, mostly provincial, for what different sources can emit within the City of Hamilton, there are a number of air quality monitors set up mostly in the Hamilton's industrial core downtown. Most of these are owned by the federal or provincial governments, and some of these are privately owned by industry that's responsible for monitoring its own emissions. All of these are included on the Hamilton Air Monitoring Network website that's included on the slide. Now, one thing we've heard consistently from the public since I've been working with the city for the past 6 years is that this website can be difficult to navigate and understand, so it's not always very clear to the public what's going on or what these numbers mean. And of course, this is actually a fairly dense air quality monitoring network for an Ontario municipality. But still, it's, there are gaps. An air quality monitor will have a radius of about 1 kilometer around it where it's taking in that air and measuring the contaminants. So anything about, 1 kilometer away or more, it won't pick up on. Will you be able to advance to the next slide, please, Linda? All right. So one thing that we have been doing for the past several years, in order to fill some of those gaps, is the air pointers. These are air quality monitoring devices that are extremely reliable and produce very high quality data. And we purchased 2 as part of a pilot project in Ward 5 in 2014. And when the pilot project wrapped up, we deployed them throughout the city. We rotate them through different locations on about a 6-month basis.
Hi, Sharm. How are you?
Oh,
I'm just.
Thank you. So we are using these to fill some of the gaps from the existing air quality monitoring network. Would you be able to go to the next slide, Linda? So some of the things that we are trying to do when we move these air pointers around, we're looking for places where there may have been temporary mobile monitoring for a few hours that showed potential exceedances. So we'll try to get an air pointer to close to that location to let us know if that was a blip, or if there was something with the equipment, or if there is an issue we need to look at. In parts of the city where we have no background air quality data, of course, industry is a big concern in Hamilton, but it's not the only concern. We also have a lot of transportation networks that can reduce traffic and things like that, that can cause air quality issues where we don't necessarily have monitors. And where we have received complaints and requests that we can follow up on. Can you go to the next slide again, Linda? Course, you know, air pointers are wonderful, but they do have a number of restrictions in terms of where we can put them. That's a picture of an air pointer there. As you can see, it's not a small device, and it has a platform and a fence around it to keep it safe. So it needs to be somewhere flat. It needs a fair amount of space. We don't want a lot of air obstructions around it that will change the flow of air and restrict what's getting into the device. And we also need to have control over that property in terms of you know, maintaining it and being able to access it. So it's got to be our property, and it also needs to be able to plug in. So it needs to have electrical siting. And ideally, when we can find all of those things, we'll also look for prevailing wind directions in order to make sure that it has a good chance of picking up potential contaminants from areas of concern. Next slide, Linda. So as you can imagine, those restrictions, they do limit us. In practice, what we are doing with our air pointers is we're putting them in city parks. City parks are more available in some parts of the city than others. And not all city parks have good electrical servicing or enough open space. A lot of them are heavily treed or have fences that make them not ideal for air pointers. So we are limited in terms of what parts of the city we can really investigate with the air pointers. So for the past several years, I've been looking for other ways for us to investigate air quality that are more flexible, that don't require on electrical sources, and are smaller, passive, don't need as much open space, and can cover more ground. And hopefully also involve the community and allow us to better communicate with the community about what we're doing and what these results mean, which is what we're so excited. This is one of the projects we're doing this year to try to fill those gaps and move that forward. And now you can go to the next slide, Linda, and now I will pass it off to Matt to discuss what this project is, what we're doing, and how it will fill some of those gaps for us.
Great. I think that was a wonderful overview, Andrea. So as Linda mentioned, Matt Adams here. I'm a resident of Dundas, been living in West Hamilton for about 12 years now. Work at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. Our research is always trying to understand how people are exposed to air pollution, why they're exposed, and what relationships with often land use, transportation, exist to try to reduce those exposures. All right, so we can just start with the slides here. So Hamilton is a very interesting city when we look at it from the perspective of air quality. It is not straightforward. There are lots of different sources. Air quality or air pollution concentrations vary across the city. Some of the reasons why, well, as we all know, we have this industrial core, which is going to be associated to some pollutants. We also have major transportation networks. We have the 403, QEW, the Link. You can drill down, look at Main Street, King Street. Those are major thoroughfares running right through the city. We have a lot of freight, a lot of truck transportation going through the downtown as well. I'm sure we'll hear more about that today. We just have lots and lots of vehicle movements around the city. Yes, vehicles have become more fuel efficient over time. At the same time, we see more people driving larger SUVs and trucks, kind of offsetting those environmental savings. We have an airport, we have a port, and then we have varying amounts of land use density. Here's a shot I tried to grab off Google Earth where we kind of see the downtown moving towards Ancaster, lots of green space. Things change across Hamilton. So we can't just assume that the air I breathe, the air you breathe, the air someone else breathes is the same. There are many reasons that they could be different. All right, we'll go to the next slide, Linda. So I'm not going to cover this in any more detail than Andrea did, but we do have, relative to every other major city in really North America, a very dense air monitoring network. It is clustered really around the industrial core, for very sort of obvious reasons in just ensuring we could track any types of major releases, trying to ensure that regulations are met. And then the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks do have I just realized you won't be able to see my mouse, do have a number of monitors somewhat spread throughout the city. So we have some information about how air quality changes across the city, but it is limited to certain spatial regions. As Andrea pointed out, it's really hard to set up these types of monitors that we're seeing here, these large, real-time measuring and real-time reporting hourly values. They take up a lot of space, they require a lot of capacity. We as a research group do operate these types of instruments, but we have some tricks up our sleeve to be able to measure in lots of different parts of urban centers. All right, we can go to the next slide. So in this project, we are going to be measuring a handful of pollutants. Some of these are transportation related air pollutants, and others are primarily industrial source pollutants. It's not saying that either of these are mutually exclusive. It's just sort of how we refer to them as based on their sort of primary source. And our goal is to understand how these air pollutants vary across the city of Hamilton. And we're very interested in connecting this to existing socioeconomic inequalities that have been present in our city. What we tend to see in sort of air pollution sciences is people who may be economically disadvantaged are often exposed to much higher concentrations of air pollution than those who are less disadvantaged economically, for example. Reason being, if we think about this, people tend to select their houses away from sort of industrial sites or things that may bring down the cost of that house when they can. And so you end up having these stratifications that exist. We want to, naturally thinking, we believe that air pollution is an issue, but at the very base level, it should at least be equitably distributed. No individual should be exposed to more pollution simply because of a lower income or they are new to Canada. But we are trying to figure out, do these inequalities exist in this sampling? All right, so we can go to the next slide. The project, it's happening now. We are getting started. The timeline is just over, at this point, we're looking at about 16 months till we're completed. We're going to start air pollution sampling in January. We're going to sample for the entire year. It's very important that we sample different times throughout the year. Different pollutants react differently at different times of the year. We want to make sure we capture what the picture looks like in summer, in spring, in fall, and in winter. And then with this, we're going to have different public outreach components as we move forward. We're in December now at our first one here. All right, so we can go to the next slide. So this is, right now, we're still, it's a little evolving, but this is how we're going to select our air monitoring locations that we will be visiting 4 times a year. So we're going to pick one location per ward. There's 15 wards in Hamilton, and those, what I'll call ward sites, we're trying to represent the average land use conditions. So if it's a ward that is primarily downtown high density, we want to measure in a downtown high density area. If it's one of the more suburban or suburban rural wards, we want to try and capture that. What is the general conditions within each ward? And so those will be our ward sites, we'll call them. And then we're going to select 45 additional sites throughout the city to try to capture those variations, those unique combinations of land use and socioeconomic conditions. As well, we're hoping, through these sort of venues that we can get some public input to help support our site selection. Where are you as concerned citizens concerned about urban air quality? What have you observed, or what have you, even smelt to some degree in extreme cases for air quality issues? And these sites will be visited multiple times a year, and we're going to measure that suite of air pollutants to really get a good sense of what does air quality look like across the city. All right, we can go to the next slide, Linda, thanks. So I talked about when we'll be sampling. What makes this possible is the technology in which we're using. We specialize in our research group in passive sampling of air pollutants. What we saw Andrea present with the air pointer or with the technology that the ministries will use, those are active samplers. They have a pump or a fan that draws air into a fairly large instrument that's going to make those measurements. Typically, we report those measurements every hour. Those are what feed things such as our air quality health index. A passive sampler is a much more simple device. And because it's simple, we can locate it on telephone poles, light standards, which, to give you a sense, there's about 100,000 of these across the city of Hamilton, if I believe my numbers are correct there. So we can sample really anywhere we want. We can locate one of these samplers. They're very small, about the size of a Tim Hortons coffee cup. And what happens is, once they are exposed to the air, the pollutant that we're interested in gets absorbed onto this filter. We then bring the filter back to our laboratory, and we can analyze it to see how much pollutant did we capture. We're going to be sampling 1 month at a time, so how much pollutant was captured over that month. And we have different filters for each of the pollutants that we're interested in. But it really allows us to see what is it like downtown adjacent to, say, these apartment buildings where we have very high structures, and we know that creates wind tunnels and it stops air from dispersing. You can't do that with the other technologies that exist. They're just, the footprint of them is too large. And so this is always a very exciting technique to really capture variations across urban space. All right, we can go to the next slide. After we take all of those samples, we relate them to land use. So we look at what are the surrounding land use conditions. Is this an area of high density residential? Is it near an industrial source? Is there a major highway near it? And we can build these air pollution maps. So we can take our information and we learn about the relationship between air pollution and land use. And after we learn that relationship, we can build out maps that let us see how air pollution, where we recorded, we know what it was, and then what should it look like across the rest of the city. And this helps us expand, because we can't measure everywhere as much as we would want to, other areas that might be high, other areas that might be low, and it helps us build that understanding of air quality. We then take those maps and take those measurements and associate them to different measures of marginalization. And there are a lot of factors, income, for example, is often one that's noted as something that's going to affect your general health. Having a lower income, we want to make sure that, when we stratify air pollution exposure across these metrics, that no individual is being exposed for reasons other than just random chance to higher or lower levels. After we do our analysis, we're working very closely with Environment Hamilton on two things. How can we communicate this information to the general public? And what do you need from us? What is the mechanism and what does the public want to see? And that's something we're really looking forward to learning more about today and as the project progresses. Let's go to the next slide.
Sorry, I think that was your last slide, Matthew.
Perfect.
And I just put this one in to just give a sense again of the engagement piece. So
great. Well, that's all I had to say. So thank you for listening, and I'll be here for questions later on.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. That's wonderful. So I hope everyone has at least a basic understanding now of what the project is all about. And I'm just going to wrap up by talking in a little bit more detail about the community engagement piece so that you all know what to expect there. So I pulled the timeline up again just so that I could speak to those four dots in the public outreach category, and so that you have a sense of that. So obviously tonight is the first project related event. And I think that's very important to acknowledge that the first step that we're taking is coming out to community and talking to you about the project and giving you a chance to provide some input at the very start of the effort. Following on tonight's session, we're encouraging all of you not only to share input tonight, but to share even more detailed input if you'd like to do that around your air quality concerns, where you want to see more monitors placed, and also how you'd like to see project monitoring results shared. And we'll have time further along in the project to have that conversation as more data becomes available. But that's a really important piece too. How should the data be presented and shared so that community can understand it and ideally make use of it moving forward? So we're planning the second community engagement session in the spring of 2022. And I am going to say our ideal would be to hold in-person sessions, but I think you can all relate, especially right now, that we can't make any commitment one way or the other. So there will be a session. We can't say right now whether it will be live or virtual, but I do want to share with you that the second session will provide probably a very brief update on project progress. It's also really going to focus in on providing an opportunity for all of you to learn more about the current government regulatory framework for air quality and air emissions. And this is really important, I think, just for everyone to have their heads wrapped around that. So the provincial government, through the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, is the main regulator of air quality in Ontario. So you'll hear a lot of detail about the role that the ministry plays. But there are also details at the federal level that will be shared. And I would add, some municipal level details, and that session will give you that information so that you're fully versed in how things work, and maybe even where you see gaps existing and that sort of thing. Session 3 is planned for the fall of 2022. And that's really going to be an opportunity to share some preliminary updates regarding the project. And I would envision this as being a session where we talk a lot more about packaging the information and sharing it out there. And then there will be another session in year 2, and we've got it marked for April of 2023. And that'll be at the end of the project, in a conversation about the research findings from the project, and hopefully some great community discussion about what the results tell us, particularly in locations where air monitoring potentially confirms that there are reasons to be concerned. We want to see meaningful dialogue and informed, meaningful action evolve out of this initiative. So hopefully that last session will be a really good venue for that to happen. And I just want to say I'm really excited about this project too, because doing the work that we do, engaging with community on air quality issues all of the time, and just the opportunity to bring a collective together to do this project, and to have those really great conversations and to see more. I always refer to it as the hyper localization of air quality monitoring, and I think when I hear people in community talking about their concerns, it's this kind of monitoring that I think can really be a big help for all of us. So I also wanted to add that Dr. Adams and his team, as he's already mentioned, they're going to be doing some neighborhood level awareness raising as they head out and they install those passive air monitors on utility poles. And they will be putting posters on those poles that are going to provide community with a bit of an explanation of what's happening, but also how they can get more information. And I think that's really important too. So one message I want to convey to all of you is please spread the word about this project. Talk to your neighbors and friends and family, and encourage them to provide their input. They don't need to be here tonight to do that. It's really important. So we have set up, and again, I'll share these details. We do have a web page on the Environment Hamilton website where we'll continue to upload information, including things like the slide deck from tonight. And there is a way that people can sign up to get a project, to be on the project information list, so that when we're sending out information about the remaining 3 meetings or any other updates, you can sign up to receive emails on that information. And then of course, finally, we're always keen to hear from you if you've got any creative ideas about how we could engage